The blast had carved a hollow in the morning, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. I stepped over the threshold, my boots crunching on pulverized concrete and shattered glass, the air thick with the acrid scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and burnt, like a forgotten memory. This was Dr. Aris Thorne's state-of-the-art bioengineering lab, or what was left of it. Catastrophic failure, the lead detective stated, his voice a low rumble, echoing slightly in the cavernous space. He gestured vaguely at the devastation. Looks like he blew himself up. Probably a miscalculation with his latest project. I didn't reply, my eyes already scanning, absorbing the scene. The detective was a good man, but he saw the grand narrative. I hunted for the footnotes. Thorne's work had been shrouded in secrecy, whispered about in hushed tones across academic circles. Groundbreaking, potentially world-changing, they'd said. Now, it was just ashes. The structural integrity team had cleared the immediate area, but the core of the lab, a reinforced chamber meant to contain volatile experiments, was a twisted monument to violent decompression. Steel beams buckled like paper, containment units vaporized, and what remained of highly specialized equipment was scattered like a child's broken toys. The central console, a marvel of holographic interfaces just yesterday, was now a melted sculpture of fused circuits and scorched plastic. I moved deliberately, each step chosen, my gaze sweeping from the highest scorch marks on the ceiling to the minutest fragments on the floor. My forensic kit, a familiar weight on my back, felt almost anachronistic in this landscape of futuristic ruin. The initial assessment was simple, an accident, perhaps suicide. A brilliant mind overwhelmed by the complexity of his own creation. It was a narrative that fit, a clean, tragic explanation. Too clean, perhaps. The lead detective continued, no signs of forced entry. All security protocols were active. Thorne was alone in here. Our working theory is a lab accident, possibly self-inflicted given the pressures he was under. I nodded slowly, my attention fixed on a section of the wall near what had once been Thorne's personal workstation. Most of the surfaces were uniformly blackened, a testament to the intense heat. But here, amidst the widespread carbonization, was a distinct pattern. It wasn't a uniform blast radius. It was too localized, too intentional. I knelt, pulling on a fresh pair of gloves. The air here was cooler, less charged. My specialized flashlight cut through the dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the ruptured roof, illuminating the anomaly. The burn mark wasn't consistent with the general outward force of an explosion originating from the center of the room. It suggested a secondary, more focused heat source, applied against the wall, not from within the core detonation. I brought my lens closer, my breath held. And there it was. A microscopic trace, embedded deep within the concrete matrix of the wall, clinging to the edge of the peculiar burn. A speck, no bigger than a pinhead, reflecting a dull, metallic sheen. It wasn't the kind of residue I'd expect from an internal combustion. It looked like osmium. An incredibly dense, rare, and high melting point metal. And it was fused to the concrete, not just resting on it. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a tragic miscalculation. This was a deliberate act. My mind began to whir, piecing together the impossible. Osmium wasn't something you'd find lying around a bioengineering lab. Its presence, fused into the wall with such a precise burn pattern, hinted at a heat source far more controlled and intense than a general explosion. Someone had applied something with extreme, focused energy after or concurrently with the main event, and they had left this infinitesimal calling card. The implications settled in my gut like a cold stone. If this wasn't an accident, if it was murder, then the killer had gone to extraordinary lengths to stage the scene. They had understood Thorne's work, the lab's intricacies, and had possessed the means to execute a plan of breathtaking complexity. My skepticism solidified into a grim certainty. This wasn't just a blast site, it was a meticulously crafted deception. I carefully collected a sample of the osmium trace and photographed the burn pattern from every conceivable angle. My work here was far from over, but the initial phase was complete. I had my anomaly. Later that evening, the lab secured and the initial reports filed, I found myself in a different kind of ruin. The psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records was a ghost of bureaucracy and forgotten lives. Dust motes, thicker here than in Thorne's lab, danced in the anemic glow of my portable lantern. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decaying paper and neglect. I tracked down a lead, a barely legible entry in an old corporate ledger mentioning Thorne's initial funding for his first, less glamorous research facility, and a curious archival cross-reference to this very building. The shelves were crammed with brittle files, yellowed folders, and ledgers thick with faded ink. I was searching for anything that might shed light on Thorne's early days, his collaborators, or any institutional conflicts that predated his meteoric rise. Corporate secrets and academic rivalries often left paper trails, even if they led to the most unlikely of places. The contrast between the hypermodern devastation of the lab and this decrepit archive was stark, yet both held fragments of a past that now felt deeply interconnected to Thorne's violent end. I pulled a heavy, leather-bound volume from a precarious shelf, its spine cracking softly. The hunt for the truth had only just begun. A faint, almost artistic swirl of what looked like solidified dust, fine as ash, stood out against the charred concrete. It wasn't a splash mark, nor was it the usual pattern left by an explosion's outward force. It was too deliberate, too contained, almost a signature. I leaned closer, my breath held. The material seemed to have been applied, not propelled. A brushstroke in soot. This wasn't an accident. This was an illusion. The air in the examination facility was sterile, a stark contrast to the acrid stench of the lab. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a constant reminder of the machinery keeping life at bay. I watched the forensic pathologist, a seasoned professional with meticulous hands, work over Thorne's remains. The sheet draped over the body offered little comfort. My gut churned with a familiar unease. Initial assessment, read, the pathologist stated, not looking up from the examination table. Extensive thermal injuries, consistent with a high-temperature blast. Internal organs show severe concussive trauma. Cause of death, unambiguous, catastrophic system failure, leading to a massive energy discharge. I circled the table, my gaze scanning the body. And the inconsistencies? I asked, knowing there had to be some. My experience told me that absolute clarity in a chaotic scene was always suspect. The pathologist paused, a small instrument glinting under the harsh lights. Here. He pointed to a section of Thorne's forearm, which, despite the burns, showed an unusual contusion pattern beneath the surface. Not typical. Almost like a struggle before the main event. And then, this. He carefully scraped a minuscule amount of material from beneath Thorne's fingernail. It was barely visible, a speck of dark brown. Not lab-related. And not from the general environment. Appears to be an organic fiber, highly degraded, but with a unique pigmentation. I peered at the sample, my mind already racing. A struggle? A unique fiber? My eyes moved to Thorne's hands. The fingers, though damaged, seemed to curl inward, not splayed as if reaching or bracing for impact. It was the posture of someone already incapacitated, or perhaps even restrained, before the blast. The narrative of a tragic lab accident was dissolving into something far more sinister. Run a full analysis on that fiber, I instructed, my voice flat. And cross-reference it with any known historical organic materials. Everything. Paper, textiles, anything that might match its degradation in pigment profile. My next stop was a temporary interview room set up in a quiet annex of the research facility. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the institutional beige walls doing little to soothe nerves. The first to arrive was the rival scientist. He was a man of sharp angles and restless energy, his movements betraying a barely contained frustration. "This is a tragedy, of course," the rival scientist began, his gaze darting around the room, avoiding mine. Thorne was brilliant. Unconventional, but brilliant. Unconventional how? I pressed, leaning forward slightly. He finally met my eyes, a flicker of something unreadable there. His methods. His secrecy. He guarded his research like a dragon. Made enemies, too. Not just professional rivals, mind you, but people he'd cut out, dismissed. He saw collaboration as weakness. Any specific individuals? Well, there was Maya. His former research assistant. Brilliant, in her own right, but Thorne let her go a few months back. Said she wasn't aligned with his vision. I heard he was quite bitter about it. She dedicated years to his project. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed too casual. And then there was our professional disagreement. Thorne and I were both vying for the same major grant funding. He won. Just last week. His project, of course, was world-changing, as he put it. A hint of a sneer touched his lips. The motive was clear, professional jealousy, a desire for recognition, perhaps even access to Thorne's groundbreaking work. The rival scientist was a man who understood the intricate dance of academic power. He knew the stakes. The former research assistant, Maya, arrived shortly after. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her posture slumped. She clutched a worn leather bag to her chest, as if for comfort. There was a fragile vulnerability about her, but also a simmering resentment that was palpable. "I heard what happened," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's awful. He was a difficult man, but he didn't deserve this." "You were dismissed by him recently?" I asked, my tone gentle but firm. She nodded, tears welling. 3 months ago. After 5 years of my life. He said I was too conventional. That I lacked the vision for his final project. It was a lie. I knew that project better than anyone, almost as well as he did. He just wanted to take all the credit himself. He always did. Did you ever try to access his lab after you were dismissed? Her head snapped up, a spark of indignation in her eyes. No. Why would I? I was hurt, yes, but I respected the security protocols. I even helped design some of them. Besides, she added, her voice dropping, he was becoming obsessed. Said he found something ancient. Something that would redefine his bioengineering. He was holed up for weeks, poring over old texts, making strange notes. Old texts? What kind? I don't know. He wouldn't say. Just that they were records of forgotten knowledge. He'd even taken a few trips to obscure archives. The last one was to that old place. The psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. Said they had a collection of obscure historical documents no one else cared about. He was looking for something specific, a cross-reference for his current work, he claimed. My pulse quickened. The psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. The unique organic fiber. It clicked. Thorne, the reclusive bioengineer, was dabbling in something beyond his usual scope, something with historical roots. And someone knew about it, perhaps even capitalized on it. I thanked her, ending the interview. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a jagged, disturbing picture. The swirl of dust on the wall, the pre-blast contusions, the unique fiber, and now, Thorne's strange obsession with ancient records. This was meticulously planned, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of Thorne's work, his habits, and perhaps even his hidden research. And I intended to follow it. The image of the crumbling files, the unique organic fiber, still etched itself onto my thoughts as I navigated the sterile corridors leading to Thorne's research sanctuary. My pulse, usually a steady drum, quickened with a mixture of anticipation and unease. The inner sanctum of Thorne's lab was a marvel of controlled chaos. Rows of sophisticated genetic sequencers hummed with a low, rhythmic thrum, their intricate mechanisms protected by transparent shields. Illuminated touchscreens displayed complex molecular structures, a language only a select few could truly decipher. The air, filtered and sterile, still carried the faint, metallic tang of ozone and something else, something subtly organic, like damp earth after a rain. This wasn't merely a workspace, it was a fortress of innovation, designed to protect secrets as much as to create them. I moved methodically, my gloved hands tracing the smooth surfaces of equipment, my eyes scanning for anything out of place. The initial assessment by the uniformed officers had been superficial, focused on the immediate aftermath of the explosion. My task was to peel back those layers, to understand the deeper currents at play. Thorne's groundbreaking research, I knew, centered on advanced genetic sequencing, a field brimming with potential. Its applications could range from eradicating global diseases to, in the wrong hands, crafting bioweaponry of unprecedented lethality. The stakes here were impossibly high. My attention soon gravitated to Thorne's central workstation, a formidable console bristling with multiple monitors and biometric scanners. The explosion had ravaged the immediate area, melting plastics and charring metals, but the core data drives, housed in a reinforced vault beneath the console, had largely survived. I activated my portable forensics kit, a compact device packed with proprietary software designed to reconstruct even the most fragmented digital evidence. As the data streamed, raw and unfiltered, onto my secure tablet, patterns began to emerge. Thorne had been deep into a project codenamed Genesis. It wasn't just theoretical, there were active experimental logs, vast datasets of gene expressions, and simulations running various environmental stressors. This was live research, on the cusp of a breakthrough. Then, a flicker. A series of anomalies caught my eye, highlighted in crimson by my analysis suite. Not just a system crash, but a sophisticated attempt at data manipulation. Specific project files related to Genesis showed fragmented deletion markers, not a clean wipe. It was like someone had tried to erase a chalk drawing, but left faint, ghostly outlines. The timestamps were even more peculiar. Several deletion attempts had occurred after the estimated time of Thorne's death, and others in the days leading up to it, originating from an external IP address that had briefly bypassed the lab's formidable firewall. An external party. Or Thorne himself, attempting to hide something, and someone else picking up where he left off. The thought sent a chill down my spine. He was different, you know. The voice, quiet and brittle, made me turn. Thorne's assistant, a woman whose name I knew only as Maya, stood framed in the doorway, clutching a data pad to her chest like a shield. Her eyes, usually bright with intelligence, were now distant, shadowed with an unspoken fear that resonated with the cold reality of the room. Her shoulders were hunched, her gaze fixed on a point beyond me, as if seeing something I couldn't. Different how? I asked, keeping my voice level, not wanting to startle her further. She hesitated, her fingers white-knuckled around the device. The last few weeks, it was like he was always looking over his shoulder. Checking the perimeter cameras, changing access codes twice a day. Paranoia, he called it. I called it a warning. A warning about what? I pressed, my mind racing to connect her words with the digital ghosts I just uncovered. The external IP, the post-mortem deletion attempts. Just about them. About the truth. He said they would stop at nothing to get their hands on Genesis. He said it contained the real data. He said it was his only leverage. A separate, encrypted drive. The thought jolted me. If such a drive existed, it would contain the unvarnished truth, the data Thorne hadn't wanted them to find. It would be his final, desperate attempt to protect his work, or perhaps, himself. My eyes swept the lab again, a new urgency propelling my search. The burn patterns, the organic fiber, the data manipulation, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying narrative. Someone wanted Genesis badly enough to kill for it, and then to meticulously erase every trace. And Thorne, brilliant and reclusive, had known it. He had been fighting a ghost, and that ghost had finally caught up to him. The tension in the room thickened, pressing down on me, urging me to move faster, to find what Thorne had tried so desperately to hide before it vanished forever. The thought of an encrypted drive, a hidden repository of Thorne's true work, pulsed through me like a low-frequency hum. My eyes, already accustomed to the chaos of the lab, sharpened, searching for the anomaly, the subtle break in the pattern that would betray its presence. I moved with a renewed, almost desperate focus, sifting through overturned equipment, peering under benches, my gloved fingers tracing the cold metal of a collapsed rack. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every glint of reflected light a potential clue. But the lab, for all its devastation, yielded no such obvious secret. The silence, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system, felt heavy, mocking. My gaze drifted back to the burned pattern on the workbench, the one that didn't quite align with the general explosion. And the microscopic trace, the nearly invisible residue I'd painstakingly collected from the edges of the deepest crater. These were my anchors, the tangible fragments of a more deliberate act. If I couldn't find Thorne's hidden truth here, I would extract it from these remnants. Back in my own facility, the air was sterile, the light unforgiving. I prepped the samples, a sliver of the unusual burn residue, and the barely there dust. The spectral analysis unit hummed to life, a low thrumming sound that always promised revelation. I loaded the samples, calibrating the lasers, the intricate dance of light and matter beginning. Minutes stretched, each pixelated line on the screen building a complex chemical fingerprint. My brow furrowed as the initial scans came in, then widened slightly as a distinct, unusual signature began to emerge. It wasn't a common compound. Not a byproduct of the chemicals Thorne was known to use. This was something engineered, a sophisticated molecular structure. I cross-referenced the data against a vast library of industrial and synthetic materials. The database churned, sifting through millions of entries, until a match, a faint but undeniable hit, flashed on the screen. A synthetic polymer. Rare, incredibly durable, designed for extreme conditions. Its application was highly specialized, typically found in advanced industrial manufacturing, aerospace components, or high-security infrastructure. This wasn't something you'd find in a bioengineering lab, certainly not as a casual contaminant. It was a deliberate introduction, a foreign element that screamed external involvement. My mind raced, connecting the dots. Thorne's research was groundbreaking, yes, but it also required immense funding, the kind only large corporations could provide. Omnicorp. They were Thorne's primary benefactor, a conglomerate notorious for its aggressive R&D, its relentless pursuit of proprietary technology. They had a history of acquiring smaller firms, absorbing their innovations. The polymer, if it was part of their proprietary materials, would be a signature, a calling card. The initial list of suspects, academic rivals, disgruntled former colleagues, suddenly felt flimsy, like straw men. This trace element shifted the entire focus. This wasn't about a personal vendetta, it was about control, about intellectual property, about power. I arranged a meeting with Omnicorp's liaison, a corporate representative named Julian. The Omnicorp building was a monolith of polished steel and tinted glass, its lobby a silent testament to wealth and influence. He was impeccably dressed, his smile practiced, almost too eager. Investigator Reed, he began, extending a hand that felt soft, almost boneless. Thank you for coming. We are, of course, utterly devastated by Dr. Thorne's tragic accident. A brilliant mind, truly. Omnicorp is committed to full cooperation. I took a seat, my gaze steady. Mr. Julian, my investigation has uncovered some inconsistencies. Specifically, a rare synthetic polymer found at the scene. It doesn't appear to be part of Dr. Thorne's standard lab inventory. Julian's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of something, surprise? Calculation? Crossed his eyes. A polymer, you say? That's unexpected. Dr. Thorne's work was primarily biological, not material science. Indeed, I pressed, leaning forward slightly. This particular polymer, I've identified it as a high-end industrial grade. Omnicorp has a number of patents in advanced material science, doesn't it? He cleared his throat, a small, almost imperceptible adjustment. Omnicorp has a diverse portfolio, investigator. We invest in many cutting-edge fields. It's possible, I suppose, that some of our proprietary materials might be found in various applications. But for it to be in Dr. Thorne's lab, I'm not sure how that would occur. He spread his hands, in gesture of open helplessness. Unless he was perhaps experimenting with new containment methods, or protective gear? He was always pushing boundaries. Or someone else brought it in, I offered, letting the implication hang in the air. Someone with access to Omnicorp's proprietary materials. Someone with access to Thorne's lab. Julian's expression remained carefully neutral, but his posture stiffened. Our security protocols for the lab were stringent, investigator. Thorne had full control over who entered. And, of course, Omnicorp personnel had limited access, strictly for logistical support and progress reviews. We had no direct involvement in his experimental procedures. And the funding? I asked. How much did Omnicorp invest in Thorne's final project? And what were the stipulations regarding intellectual property? He paused, then produced a tablet. Our financial contributions were substantial, naturally. As for IP, standard agreements were in place. Omnicorp had first right of refusal on any commercializable breakthroughs. It's all very transparent. He scrolled through a document, turning the screen slightly towards me. The figures were indeed large, the terms dense with legalese. His cooperation felt forced, the transparency a veneer over something opaque. He was giving me answers, yes, but they were the right answers, the ones designed to deflect. My gut tightened. He wasn't trying to hide that Omnicorp had the polymer, but rather how it got into Thorne's lab. I'll need a full list of all Omnicorp personnel who had access to Dr. Thorne's lab in the last 6 months, I stated. And a detailed inventory of any proprietary materials Omnicorp supplied to the lab, regardless of their stated purpose. Julian nodded slowly, his smile returning, though it seemed a shade thinner. Of course, investigator. We'll compile that immediately. Anything to assist your investigation. We want to see justice for Dr. Thorne. As I left the gleaming corporate tower, the tension in my shoulders hadn't eased. The polymer was a solid lead, a thread connecting the sterile lab to the polished halls of corporate power. But Julian's performance, his overly cooperative evasiveness, told me I was only scratching the surface. This wasn't just about a material, it was about the secrets it guarded. The true story, I suspected, lay buried deeper, perhaps in some forgotten corner, like the kind of archived history one might find tucked away in a psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records, far from the public eye. I knew I had to dig into Omnicorp's less glamorous past, to find the cracks in their polished facade. The polymer, a thread spun from the sterile confines of Thorne's lab, led directly to the corporate tower. Julian's smooth performance still grated on me, a veneer of cooperation thinly masking something else entirely. He knew more than he let on, and I knew I was only scraping the surface of whatever intricate deception had been woven around Thorne's final moments. My shoulders still carried the phantom weight of that corporate tension as I drove, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and crimson. I was heading to my own analysis space, a small, unassuming unit tucked away in an industrial park, far from prying eyes. It was where I could truly focus, away from the bureaucratic hum and the subtle pressures of official channels. The street was quiet, a late-night stillness settling over the empty storefronts. Suddenly, a flash of high beams filled my rearview mirror, impossibly close. I instinctively swerved, the tires protesting with a sharp squeal as a dark sedan roared past, brushing my bumper with a jolt that rattled my teeth. It didn't slow, didn't stop, just vanished around the next bend. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Not a random act. Not on this deserted stretch of road, not with that speed, that precision. It felt deliberate, a message delivered with a blunt force. Someone wanted my attention, and they had it. The air in the car felt thick, charged with an unspoken threat. I pulled into my bay, the mundane act of parking feeling heavy with new significance. The steel roll-up door grated open, revealing the ordered chaos of my workspace. Every tool, every sample tray, every discarded coffee cup had its place, the system only I understood. I locked the main door behind me, the click echoing in the quiet. My gaze swept the room, not for anything obvious, but for the almost imperceptible. My eyes landed on the small, framed photograph of my late mentor, tucked behind a stack of reference manuals. It was angled slightly differently than I remembered. A millimeter, perhaps two. Nobody else would have noticed. My breath hitched. I walked over, my hand hovering. No dust disturbed, no fingerprints visible on the glass. The frame was simply off. A silent, chilling affirmation that the sedan hadn't been an isolated incident. Someone had been here. Someone knew where I worked, where I thought I was safe. They hadn't taken anything obvious. They hadn't disturbed the core of my research. My determination, instead of wavering, hardened. This wasn't just a lab accident anymore. This was a deliberate cover-up, and I was clearly getting too close. The polymer was still my best lead. I pulled up schematics on my main screen, cross-referencing materials suppliers, historical usage data, anything that might trace its origin beyond Thorne's lab. The polymer itself was cutting-edge, but some of its base components had older, more obscure applications. One particular variant, a highly stable, non-reactive compound, had a curious entry in a digitized archive, experimental use in specialized medical equipment, early 2000s, limited trials. The record was vague, pointing to a facility that had long since been decommissioned. The address led me to the edge of the city, to a sprawling, desolate complex. I'd obtained a skeleton key from city archives, a last-ditch effort to find any paper trail on that obscure polymer variant. The door groaned open, spewing dust and the stale scent of decay. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of plaster under my boots. Corridors stretched into murky depths, lined with empty rooms. I followed the faded signs to the old records wing. Shelves upon shelves of decaying files awaited, a graveyard of forgotten histories. It was a long shot, but sometimes the most crucial details lay buried under layers of neglect. My phone vibrated, startling me. It was Maya. Are you okay? I heard about what happened on the news, that near miss. I'm fine, Maya. Just a bit shaken. They called it a hit and run, but I don't know, it felt different, and after what I saw. Her voice trailed off, a raw tremor in its wake. I should have told you sooner. The dusty archives, the polymer, the near miss, the breached lab, it all coalesced into a sharp, undeniable focus. She took a shaky breath. The week before Thorne died, I saw someone. Late at night. They were accessing the lab. Who was it? Did you recognize them? No. Not exactly. They were always obscured. Who did? They moved like they knew the place, though. No fumbling with keycards, just in and out. I thought it was Thorne at first, just working late, but then I realized the build was different. Taller, broader. And they used a different access point sometimes, a service entrance Thorne rarely used. But after what happened to Thorne? And now you. Her voice broke. I think they were there. Before. Doing something. An unknown individual, accessing Thorne's high-security lab after hours, just days before his death. It wasn't an accident. It was a meticulously planned operation, and the perpetrator was now escalating their efforts, trying to warn me off. The game had just shifted. The chill in the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records wasn't just from the decaying infrastructure. It clung to me, a lingering residue of the unknown presence that had slipped through my fingers. My breath still hitched occasionally, remembering the faint scuff of a shoe, the almost imperceptible shift in the stale air. It wasn't an accident, I'd concluded. But a warning wasn't a deterrent. It was a challenge. The crime scene technicians had cleared most of their equipment, leaving behind only the evidence markers and the ghostly outlines of Thorne's last moments. My focus now shifted from the physical detritus to the invisible pathways, the digital breadcrumbs woven into the lab's bespoke systems. I set up my workstation amidst the scorched remains, plugging into the main server rack, a hulking metal cabinet that had miraculously survived the worst of the thermal event. The lab's security and environmental control systems were a labyrinth of custom-coded protocols, a testament to Thorne's reclusive genius. I started with the access logs, cross-referencing them with the network activity. The first few hours were a tedious crawl through encrypted timestamps and IP addresses, a digital archaeology project. Then I found it. Not an external breach, but an internal manipulation. Days before the incident, a series of commands had been initiated from within the network, not by Thorne's usual terminal, but a ghost IP address that briefly surfaced, then vanished. It was a sophisticated proxy, designed to mimic a routine system update, but its payload was anything but benign. I painstakingly reconstructed the sequence. Phase 1, a subtle, programmed degradation of the atmospheric controls. Not a sudden dump of inert gas, which would have triggered alarms, but a slow, almost imperceptible reduction of oxygen levels, paired with the introduction of a specific, non-toxic atmospheric modifier that Thorne often used in his experimental chambers. This would have caused disorientation, impaired judgment, a slow, insidious incapacitation. The environmental sensors, I noted, had been subtly recalibrated, their thresholds slightly altered to ignore these minor fluctuations. A phantom hand had adjusted the very parameters designed to protect. The physical scene began to coalesce with the digital data. The burn patterns on the central reactor, initially attributed to a critical overload, now told a different story. It wasn't a spontaneous failure. The reactor's internal pressure regulators had been remotely overridden, their safety protocols disengaged just minutes before the critical temperature spike. The digital log showed a surge in power, not a steady build-up, but a deliberate, forced injection of energy, bypassing the primary safeguards. It was like a controlled detonation, not an accidental explosion. I zoomed in on the reactor's schematics, comparing them to the anomaly in the power grid logs. The perpetrator hadn't just overloaded the system, they'd exploited a specific vulnerability in Thorne's experimental power coupling, a detail only someone intimately familiar with his work would know. Thorne had been pushing the boundaries of energy transfer, and this coupling was his custom design, a unique pathway. The killer had turned Thorne's innovation into his demise. The final stage of the accident was the most telling. Once Thorne was incapacitated and the reactor critically compromised, a secondary, smaller release of a highly reactive compound had been triggered. This wasn't part of Thorne's immediate research protocol. It was a chemical signature I recognized from some of his earlier, more volatile experiments, designed to create a rapid, contained thermal event. This particular compound, when exposed to the now oxygen-depleted, modified atmosphere, would have ignited almost silently, creating the intense, localized flash that had scorched the ceiling and damaged the server rack, effectively wiping the most immediate, easily accessible digital evidence. The remote trigger for this multi-stage orchestration was the phantom IP address. It had initiated the commands, then executed a self-destruct sequence, erasing its own tracks from the network. But digital trails, however faint, are never truly gone. I traced the IP's last known hop, a commercial VPN server located halfway across the globe, a dead end designed to obscure the true origin. I leaned back, the faint smell of ozone and burnt electronics filling my nostrils. This was an assassination designed to look like an accident, engineered with surgical precision. The perpetrator hadn't just understood Thorne's lab, they had understood Thorne's mind. They knew his protocols, his experimental setup, even the specific vulnerabilities of his bespoke equipment. This wasn't an outsider. This was someone who had walked these very floors, breathed this very air, someone who spoke the unique language of Thorne's groundbreaking research. The warning was real. And I was getting closer. I'd spent another hour tracing the faint energy signatures, the spectral echoes of a recent intrusion, but found nothing concrete. The records themselves, brittle and yellowed, offered no solace, only the ghosts of forgotten lives. The encounter had sharpened my resolve, etching a new layer of urgency into the Thorne investigation. The official report, a thick binder of neatly typed pages, sat open on my desk, its conclusions stark, miscalculation or self-inflicted. But my meticulous eye saw beyond the surface. The precise scorch marks on the floor, the peculiar dispersal pattern of the shattered containment unit, the microscopic trace of an unusual accelerant I'd found beneath a floor panel, these weren't the hallmarks of a tragic error. They were too deliberate, too artfully arranged to suggest anything but a meticulously planned event designed to mimic an accident. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the server racks a low thrum in the quiet room. If the killer had gone to such elaborate lengths, their motive had to be equally complex. Simple theft of Thorne's groundbreaking research no longer fit. A professional thief would have extracted the data cleanly, perhaps even staged a break-in. This was different. This was destruction, a complete obliteration of the work and its creator. My hypothesis solidified, the killer wasn't just after Thorne's work, but aimed to prevent its completion or public release. What was so dangerous about his research that it warranted such an extreme, calculated, act of suppression? I turned my attention to the digital footprint. Thorne's primary research logs were extensive, detailed, but curiously sterile. They contained the scientific data, the experimental parameters, the theoretical models, everything I expected, yet nothing that screamed world-changing in a way that would trigger such a violent response. It felt incomplete, almost curated. For days, I'd been sifting through the secondary data, the archived emails, the network traffic logs, the personal files. The sheer volume was staggering, a digital ocean. My fingers flew across the keyboard, commands flickering across the multiple monitors. I used custom scripts, forensic tools designed to unearth hidden data streams, fragmented files, and obscured partitions. The process was grueling, a marathon of concentration and patience. Every deleted file, every cached memory, every seemingly innocuous metadata tag was scrutinized. A hidden, encrypted section of Thorne's research logs. It wasn't linked to his main research directory, nor was it accessible through any of his standard user profiles. This was a private vault, deliberately isolated. A jolt of adrenaline coursed through me. This was it. The real story. The key to the complex motive. The encryption was robust, a multi-layered algorithm Thorne himself had likely devised. It took hours of brute force attempts, cross-referencing cryptographic keys I'd found scattered in various unrelated files, a snippet in an old email signature, a sequence embedded in a screensaver graphic. The air grew thick with tension. Each failed attempt was a frustrating setback, but I pushed through, my determination fueled by the growing certainty that I was on the right path. The server fans whirred louder, the processors straining under the load. Sweat beaded on my forehead as the progress bar crept, agonizingly slow. Finally, with a soft chime, the last layer of encryption shattered. The hidden logs unfolded before me, raw and unfiltered. Unlike the sterile official entries, these were personal, almost frantic. He detailed his ethical concerns about the weaponization of his discoveries. He wrote of feeling manipulated, of his work being twisted into something monstrous. The entries grew increasingly agitated, describing how his breakthroughs were being secretly repurposed by a corporate entity. Then, the name appeared, Omnicorp. Thorne wrote of Omnicorp's clandestine funding of a separate, more dangerous project, one that leveraged his core research for destructive purposes. He discovered their true intentions, and his final entries were a desperate plea, an outline of his intent to expose Omnicorp. He planned to leak everything, to bring their covert operations into the harsh light of public scrutiny. He believed it was his only option, his moral imperative. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about a scientific discovery, it was about power, control, and a deadly secret Omnicorp was desperate to keep buried. I wasn't just chasing a killer, I was now squarely in the crosshairs of a powerful corporation. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. The lingering chill from the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records wasn't just a memory, it had seeped into my bones, a constant, nagging reminder of the presence I'd almost cornered. I'd walked away from that place with more questions than answers, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. Someone else was playing this game, and they were good. Too good. Now, hours later, the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records served a different, more mundane function, a temporary, forgotten repository for the labyrinthine corporate archives I'd managed to unearth. Dust motes danced in the anemic glow of my work lamp, illuminating stacks of mildewed boxes and sagging shelves. My laptop, a stark beacon of modern technology amidst the decay, hummed with the effort of processing the data I'd extracted from the lab's servers. I had the access logs, the employee profiles, and Dr. Thorne's detailed project blueprints, a digital fortress of information that held the key to his demise. I started with the access logs for the 2 weeks preceding Dr. Thorne's death. Every entry, every swipe card, every biometric scan was meticulously scrutinized. I cross-referenced these with the employee roster, filtering out the usual suspects: cleaning crew, security patrols, maintenance engineers. Their patterns were predictable, their movements accounted for. The problem wasn't who was supposed to be there, but who was there unexpectedly, or who had access to areas beyond their typical remit. My screen filled with a cascade of names, each linked to their respective departments and clearance levels. The list was long, but my focus was sharp. I needed individuals with specific expertise, a deep understanding of bioengineering protocols, lab safety overrides, and, crucially, the precise sequence of events that could mimic a catastrophic accident while actually being a deliberate act of sabotage. This wasn't a random explosion, it was a carefully orchestrated demolition, designed to look like a tragic misstep. I started building profiles. I looked for anyone with advanced technical certifications in high-containment environments, anyone with a history of working directly with Thorne's specific research area, or anyone whose digital footprint showed unusual interest in the lab's ventilation systems, power grids, or emergency shutdown procedures. The list began to shrink, shedding the extraneous. The vast majority of Omnicorp personnel were simply cogs in a larger machine, following established routines. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up academic records, past project involvement, even internal transfer requests. I was looking for an anomaly, a skill set that didn't quite fit the visible job description. The first pass narrowed it down to a dozen individuals, mostly senior research associates and a few specialized engineers. This was progress. But the method of sabotage was too elegant, too precise for simple technical proficiency. It spoke of a deeper understanding, almost an intuition for how the system failed. I then layered in a different filter, individuals with high-level administrative access, not just to the lab itself, but to the broader Omnicorp network, people who could alter records, bypass security protocols, or even plant false leads. This cut the list further, bringing it down to a tight group of 5. Each one had the technical acumen, the potential access, and a plausible reason to be involved in a project of Thorne's magnitude. One name, however, kept snagging my attention, a discordant note in the symphony of corporate efficiency: David Thorne, the Omnicorp liaison assigned to Dr. Aris Thorne's project. His digital profile was almost too clean, too polished. It screamed professional, competent, almost aggressively unremarkable. That alone made me suspicious. My experience told me truly dangerous individuals often hid in plain sight, projecting an image of bland normalcy. I pulled up David Thorne's full employment history, digging deeper than the surface-level corporate resume. That's when the first crack appeared in the facade. Before his tenure at Omnicorp, a significant portion of his early career was redacted, marked with an innocuous classified government service notation. My internal alarm bells began to clang. Classified government service in a corporate liaisons file often translated to something far more specific: intelligence, covert operations, black ops. It hinted at a skill set that went beyond project management and into the realm of strategic manipulation and clandestine activities. I cross-referenced David Thorne's name with public records and archived news reports, pushing past the corporate firewalls and into the less curated corners of the internet. It took time, sifting through decades of digital detritus, but eventually, I found it. A buried article from a decade ago, detailing a high-profile industrial espionage case involving stolen intellectual property from a rival bioengineering firm. The article mentioned a shadow operative who had infiltrated the company, facilitated the data theft, and then vanished without a trace, leaving a trail of sophisticated digital obfuscation. The description of the operative's methods, their ability to manipulate systems from the inside, resonated with the precision I'd observed in Dr. Aris Thorne's lab. The article didn't name the operative, but it described their profile: a master of disguise, a ghost in the machine, with a background in specialized government security protocols. The pieces clicked into place with an unsettling finality. David Thorne's polished demeanor, his extensive access, his suspiciously clean record, and now this veiled past, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was a pattern. The Omnicorp liaison wasn't just overseeing the project, he was a potential architect of its destruction. He had a name. It had been a calculated risk, that visit, a whisper I'd chased through the dust and decay, and it had confirmed my suspicion: someone was watching me, trying to manipulate the narrative, just as they had manipulated the scene of Aris Thorne's demise. My gaze drifted over the scattered reports, the magnified images of cellular structures, the schematics of Aris's unique containment systems. The killer was close, intimately familiar with this place, with Aris's mind. They wouldn't tolerate any deviation from their carefully constructed illusion of an accident. That was the leverage I needed. I leaned back, a plan crystallizing. I'd spent days meticulously crafting a false lead, a phantom breakthrough in Aris's research. It wasn't about the specific science, it was about the implication. I fabricated a preliminary report, detailing a stabilized variant of Aris's experimental catalyst, something that, if true, would not only negate the accident theory but also hint at a revolutionary step forward, a step Aris was supposedly on the verge of. The killer knew the true nature of Aris's final project, the dangerous, unethical undercurrents. A stabilized variant would be a direct threat to their narrative, a loose end they couldn't afford. I arranged for a junior investigator to accidentally leave the report on a communal printer, knowing the corporate executive, Aris's own brother, frequented that area. He paused by the printer, ostensibly to retrieve his own documents. I saw the subtle shift in his posture, the almost imperceptible hesitation as his eyes caught the title of my staged report. He picked it up, a casual, almost dismissive gesture, but I saw the slight tremor in his hand, the way his gaze lingered a fraction too long. He pocketed it. The bait was taken. Now, I waited for the trap to spring. I spent the next few hours reviewing the last pieces of evidence, the microscopic anomalies. The trace polymer. It was my anchor, my irrefutable truth. I had found it at the site of my own near miss, a faint residue on the floor where I tripped, and again, in a less obvious form, within the intricate locking mechanism of Aris's lab door. It was a unique compound, a specialized resin used in Aris's bespoke security protocols, designed to degrade rapidly under specific conditions, leaving almost no trace. Almost. Just as the building began to quiet for the night, the emergency lights flickered, plunging my corridor into a sudden, unsettling gloom. The facility's internal network sputtered, then died. Someone was attempting to cripple the system, to cover their tracks. I gripped the small, sealed evidence bag containing the polymer sample. This was it. I knew where he would go. The main data server, where Aris's core research was backed up, and where my fabricated report would have led him. I found the corporate executive hunched over a terminal in the central server room, his face illuminated by the flickering screen, a small data drive clutched in his hand. "What are you doing here?" And just when a certain stabilized variant report goes missing from the printer. His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was just checking the system, trying to restore functionality." "No," I countered, holding up the evidence bag, the minuscule fleck of polymer glinting. "You were trying to erase it. And everything else that links you to Aris's death." I stepped closer, placing the bag on the console between us. This is a trace polymer, a specialized resin Aris used in his lab's unique security system. It degrades rapidly, almost perfectly, under specific thermal and chemical conditions. Conditions that mirror the catastrophic accident in Aris's lab. Conditions that also, coincidentally, occurred during a power surge that almost took me out a few days ago. His gaze flickered to the polymer, then back to me, the bravado draining from his face. It's a coincidence. Aris was experimenting with new compounds. He was, but not with this, I pressed, my voice low and steady. This polymer was part of the failsafe. It was designed to contain the volatile elements, not to facilitate their release. But someone tampered with it, altered its degradation profile, turning a safety measure into a trigger. And the same modified polymer, the same unique signature, was found in the mechanisms of Aris's lab door, and on the floor where I almost took a tumble. The corporate executive's shoulders slumped. The fight had gone out of him. He stared at the glowing screen, then at the minuscule evidence. He was going to ruin everything, he finally mumbled, his voice hoarse. Aris. He was brilliant, but he was naive. He stumbled onto something Omnicorp was developing, something beyond ethical bounds. A bioweapon. He threatened to expose them, to go public with his findings, to leak the data. My internal thoughts raced, piecing together the corporate maneuvering, the pressure. So Omnicorp tasked you with neutralizing him? He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the distant, unseeing servers. They didn't want a scandal. Not with the stakes so high. They promised me everything, if I could handle it quietly. Make it look like an accident. I knew his systems, his habits. I knew how to make it convincing. The polymer. It was the perfect distraction, a unique signature that would point to a lab accident, not sabotage. I thought I'd covered every angle. At the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. The bioweapon. The corporate cover-up. And his own brother, the instrument of his demise. The pieces clicked into place, forming a grim, complete picture. The confession had shattered the air, leaving a vacuum that the arrival of uniformed officers quickly filled. David Thorne, his face pale and slack, offered no resistance. The lead investigator signaled, and two officers moved in, their movements practiced, professional. I watched them secure him, the cold glint of the cuffs a stark punctuation mark on the grim tableau. There was no triumph in me, only a profound, weary understanding. The brother had killed the brother, not in a fit of rage, but with a chilling, calculated precision, for profit and corporate loyalty. The room emptied slowly, the tension dissipating into the stale air of the interrogation chamber. I stood by the two-way mirror, watching the forensic teams begin their methodical sweep, documenting every detail, every nuance of David's spent confession. My colleague clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. "Good work, Reed," he murmured. "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Not truly. His words about Omnicorp's deep involvement, the bioweapon, the systematic silencing of dissent, they echoed in my mind. Now, with the full weight of the conspiracy laid bare, it felt like a breadcrumb. A hunch, nothing more, but a hunch born of months sifting through lies. I directed a small unit to follow up, providing the vague address, a forgotten corner of the city. The city lights thinned, replaced by the skeletal outlines of industrial decay. The GPS led me down a crumbling service road, past rusted fences and overgrown weeds, to a sprawling, desolate structure. This was it, the old psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. The air grew heavy with the scent of damp concrete and decay as I pushed through a side door, already forced open by the earlier team. My flashlight beam cut through the absolute blackness inside, illuminating peeling paint, overturned furniture, and the faint, unsettling impression of lives once lived and then abruptly discarded. Dust motes danced in the light, thick as snow. This wasn't just abandoned, it felt haunted by neglect. The team had already located the wing David had described, a section deeper inside, seemingly untouched by the most recent vandalism. I found the lead officer sifting through piles of mildewed files in what must have once been an administrative office. "Anything?" I asked, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Just old intake forms, discharge papers, staff rosters," the officer replied, pushing aside a stack of yellowed folders. "Nothing that screams corporate conspiracy." I moved past him, my gaze drawn to a heavy, built-in cabinet, its wooden doors warped and swollen. A faint smell, not of dust, but of something metallic, something like old ink and aged paper, emanated from behind it. I wrestled with the doors, forcing them open with a groan of stressed wood. Inside, carefully organized despite the passage of decades, were not patient records, but a different kind of archive. They detailed illicit funding streams, shell corporations, and a timeline of research grants dating back 30 years, all leading back to Omnicorp. Names, dates, project codes, many of them mirroring the early stages of the bioweapon project Aris Thorne had been working on. There were internal memos, too, discussing human trials and containment failures disguised as industrial accidents. This wasn't just about Aris Thorne, this was a generational pattern of ruthless ambition and criminal negligence, systematically buried. Aris Thorne must have discovered these, perhaps even secured them, knowing they were his only leverage, his only insurance. The discovery ignited a firestorm. The information from the old records, combined with David Thorne's testimony, broke the dam. Within hours, the news channels were ablaze. Omnicorp's stock plummeted. High-profile executives, their names once synonymous with innovation and power, were apprehended in their sprawling estates and glass-fronted offices. My phone rang incessantly, but I mostly let it ring. I watched the unfolding drama on a small television in the break room, the faces of bewildered reporters, the shocked expressions of politicians. The public's reaction was a mixture of outrage and disbelief. How could such a monolithic corporation operate with such impunity for so long? The ethical debate surrounding scientific advancement and corporate responsibility exploded across every platform. Aris Thorne, once a reclusive genius, became a posthumous martyr, his name etched into the grim narrative of corporate greed. And then there was the research itself. The bioweapon. The sheer destructive potential of Aris Thorne's final project hung over everything like a storm cloud. Governments and international organizations, once dismissive or unaware, now scrambled, vying for control over the remaining data, the samples, the very knowledge that could unleash unimaginable devastation. The threat of it falling into the wrong hands was a palpable, terrifying reality. My investigation had brought justice, yes, but it had also unearthed a Pandora's box, and the world was now grappling with its contents. The immediate fallout was contained, but the wider implications, the true aftermath, had only just begun. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were not dusty files but sturdy, leather-bound ledgers. They were not official records, but a private collection, meticulously kept. The air, thick with the scent of decaying paper and the metallic tang I'd first noticed, seemed to vibrate with untold stories. I pulled one out, its weight surprising, and laid it open on a nearby overturned desk. The pages were filled with elegant, precise handwriting, Thorne's own. These weren't research notes. These were journals. Personal observations, philosophical musings, and, crucially, a detailed account of his interactions with a specific individual, a former colleague, someone he once considered a mentor, now a rival. The entries painted a picture of increasing paranoia, of Thorne's growing belief that his mentor was not just interested in his research, but in possessing it, in erasing Thorne's contribution entirely. There were dates, specific meetings, veiled threats, and finally, Thorne's desperate plan to protect his legacy by embedding a final, unreplicable safeguard into his work, a safeguard that would destroy the research if tampered with incorrectly. The catastrophic lab accident was no accident at all. The last entry was dated the day before his death. It spoke of a final, heated confrontation, Thorne refusing to yield, the mentor's growing desperation. It even detailed the specific, obscure chemical compound Thorne planned to use as a fail-safe trigger, a compound that, when combined with the specific reagents for his research, would cause the precise, unique burn pattern I'd found. The metallic smell in the cabinet? It wasn't ink. It was the subtle, lingering scent of that compound, transferred from Thorne's hands onto the pages as he wrote, and then onto the cabinet's interior. He had written his own epitaph, his own indictment, hiding it in plain sight, protected by the very location I'd been led to, this quiet, desolate corner of the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. I closed the ledger, the leather creaking softly in the oppressive silence. My fingers traced the worn cover. This was it. The final, undeniable proof. I pulled out my phone, the screen a jarring beacon in the dim light, and began the call. The voice on the other end, the lead detective on the case, was weary but attentive. I laid out the sequence of events, the motive, the method, and the definitive proof now in my hands. There was a pause, a long breath, then a quiet understood, read. We're moving. The arrest of Thorne's former colleague came swiftly, quietly. The evidence from the journals, corroborated by the unique chemical residues and the timeline I'd meticulously reconstructed, was overwhelming. The public narrative shifted from tragic accident to calculated murder, a chilling tale of ambition overriding ethics. In the weeks that followed, the dust settled, but the echoes lingered. I found myself staring at the city skyline from my apartment window more often than usual, the glow of distant lights blurring into a single, indifferent haze. The Thorne case wasn't just another successful investigation, it was a stark reminder of the fragile line between innovation and avarice, between progress and peril. Thorne, a man of immense intellect, had inadvertently created a weapon out of his own genius, a weapon that ultimately consumed him. His death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a cautionary tale for the entire scientific community. I thought about the colleague, the man who had allowed envy to fester into murder. His brilliance, once a source of inspiration, had been twisted into a tool for destruction. It made me wonder how many other minds, driven by similar pressures, teetered on that precipice. The personal toll was undeniable. The late nights, the constant replaying of crime scene details, the mental reconstruction of Thorne's final moments, they left their mark. There were days when the weight of it all felt crushing, a gray pallor over everything. But then I'd remember the quiet dignity of Thorne's sister, the relief in her eyes when the truth was finally unveiled. That was the anchor. That was the reason I kept going. Forensic justice wasn't a clean, clinical science. It was a messy, often heartbreaking excavation of human failure. But it was also a vital one. Someone had to sift through the debris, interpret the silent testimony of molecules and residues, and give a voice to those who could no longer speak. The call came late one evening, weeks after Thorne's case had been officially closed. A new voice, unfamiliar, crisp. A high-profile disappearance. A cutting-edge research facility, eerily similar in its security protocols to Thorne's lab. The details were sparse, deliberately so, but the undercurrent of urgency was palpable. I listened, my mind already sifting through the limited information, connecting invisible dots. The world, it seemed, never ran out of mysteries, never ceased to offer up new, intricate puzzles for me to solve. Another canvas of chaos awaited my meticulous eye, another truth waiting to be painstakingly unearthed from the wreckage of ambition and deceit. I took a deep breath, the city lights reflecting faintly in my eyes, and began to pack my bag.